The Legend of Zelda is arguably the most beloved video game series ever made. Seriously, like 6 of their games are considered masterpieces by the general public, and a lot of them get the praise that I might as well deserved. In 1986, Nintendo released the first Legend of Zelda, and it was critically acclaimed pretty much at the start. Outside of the Mario games, Zelda was the game that drew all people towards the NES. Its open world and level design still hold up to this day in my eyes, and the player freedom it offers was something that we never got in video games at the time. People seem to forget that there was a huge video game recession in the early 80s. In 1983, the video game console market brought in roughly $3.2 billion globally, and in 1985, it dropped off to just $100 million. News outlets were claiming that video games were out the door, and it was just another pop culture failure, kind of like silly bands in the 2000s and the fidget spinners of 2010s. But then, we got Zelda in 1986, and the rest was history. When you look at the grand catalog of NES games, I will probably say The Legend of Zelda is the best game in the NES catalog. I definitely think it holds up better than some of the other ones. And then we got a sequel. Oh boy. Zelda 2 came out a year later in 1987, and it was a critical and commercial success. It reached number 26 on the best Nintendo games in the Nintendo Power Rankings. You know, that magazine that Nintendo basically used in the 80s and 90s to essentially jerk themselves off. Regardless, Zelda 2 was deemed an instant classic and became just as loved as the first. Yeah, Zelda 2 sucks. It actually, really sucks. How do I put this? Zelda 2 took everything great about the first game and essentially set it on fire. Most modern game critics and people who go back to the game nowadays have pretty much the same reaction. Why am I even playing this? You look at any Zelda best to worst list on the internet, and I can promise you about 99.9% of the time, Zelda 2 Adventures of Link is pretty much at the bottom. Look, there are some decent things that go on in Zelda 2, okay? The overall design for Link as a character, is pretty cool, and it would set the standard for games to base their models off it. And yeah, the subtitle, Adventures of Link, we finally got a name for the guy, you know? Granted, most Zelda games you can name him whatever you want, but hey, at least if you want a headcanon, we now have a name. Also, soundtrack, it goes way harder than it has every right to be, and I would argue, top 5 Zelda soundtrack. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up everything good about Zelda 2. Look, I want to get a disclaimer out of the way, alright? Before I pick this game apart and trash it, if you like Zelda 2, or it's your favorite Zelda game, or if it's your favorite game of all time, more power to you. I'm happy for you. You get some enjoyment out of your time with the game that I didn't. And that is truly a great thing. I'm a critic at heart, and I'm pretty much a cynical bastard, which is not as fun as people make it out to be. But, at a whole, if I could love everything, I would. So, again, don't take it as a personal attack. I just think this game has some serious broken flaws that need to be addressed. I also want to ask an overall question, and that is this game even worth playing in the year 2025? Let's get into it. The world in Zelda 2 looks so much worse than the original. It changed its camera from a top-down angle to a side-scrolling one, instead of having the cool open dungeon full of treacherous enemies and all these angles you could approach it from. But now you have to turn left and right, and maybe jump occasionally. The towns were a nice touch, but they were so boring. You meet one lady who takes a 16-year-old Link, mind you, into her house to heal him. Yeah, you connect the dots on that one. And then some old man you can learn a spell from. That's all the towns do. You can just heal up and be a glorified rest stop, or talk to a guy who gives you a spell that basically helps you throughout the next dungeon. And outside of it just being bland, the townspeople outside of them, they're so unhelpful. Let's play a quick game here, okay? So there's this guard that you need him to make a bridge for you to get across the next area. And he tells you that only townfolk may cross this river. So what do you think that means? As an adventurer, what do you think you have to do to get him to lower the bridge for you? If you guess, go around the map and find a hidden entrance and talk to some random guy to give his verbal consent for you to go over and cross the bridge. Yeah, I don't think anyone said that, because it actually makes absolutely no sense, because that doesn't make you a townsfolk like the guy described. And I know it's a small point of contention, and I know I'm going to draw a lot of parallels with the original Zelda, but I think games like this you have to, considering how limiting they were and just how great the original still holds up. But for a game series that was initially praised for its player freedom in this world that you could go anywhere, why in the first 25 steps do you block the main road with a rock? Tell me, the open world is even worse. In the OG Zelda, you fought enemies as you transitioned to the next screen. In Zelda 2, enemies only approach in these 2 random sprite encounters, to which they teleport you to a completely different screen for no reason whatsoever, and you can find yourself in some very unfair combat scenarios. Speaking of, I'll give Zelda 2 some credit here. They do have diversity in their combat, more than the original Zelda. You have to approach each enemy in it differently. There are some enemies that you can just plain old spam attack on, but there's some where you can only hit them on their legs, some only on top of their head, or do this jump attack to bypass some of their shields. But all this innovation and change gets neglected once you realize how brutal, unfair, and excruciatingly painful the difficulty in Zelda 2's combat is. I literally had to use some Game Genie magic just to get through that crap. The boomerang guys are especially annoying, and it'll chew up your experience points. Yeah, if you die 3 times, you lose all your experience points. But Josh, why would I need experience points? Ha, so glad you asked. So Zelda 2 added an RPG level system. With every level, you get to upgrade one of 3 things: your health, your magic, or your attack power. Which on paper wasn't really a bad idea, considering just how popular the RPG genre was in Japan at the time. But again, if you get a game over screen, you lose all your experience. So imagine this: you are thousands of experience points into a grind, and as you're trying to head to town to heal, you get jumped and forced into an unfair combat scenario that kills you, so now you have to start completely over. What's also stupid is there are certain enemies that will steal your experience. This happens in graveyard sections of the game, amongst others. But when your whole game mantra is explore our super dope world, why would you make parts of it so unfun and brutal to go into? In the original Zelda, you got items that increased your health and damage. The only sacrifice was your ability to explore and find them. In Zelda 2, to increase your health and damage, you basically have to sacrifice your will to live and commit to a grind. Before you say it, I know the NES games weren't dependent on the story, and I get that, but I think because maybe the Hyrule Historia basically said, hey, all these stories matter, I think it's okay to criticize these older game stories considering you're doing an overbranching timeline. And don't get me wrong, people complain enough about how dumb and convoluted the overarching timeline of The Legend of Zelda already is. But hey, I think it opens it up to some scrutiny. And Zelda 2 is really out there. Unlike most Zelda games, Zelda 2 is a direct sequel from the original. So I am, in one paragraph in the script, gonna sum up the truncated version of the story of Zelda 2 Adventure of Link. 6 years after the first game, Link discovers that Zelda has been placed under a sleep spell by Ganon. No, not that Zelda. There's actually been 2 Zeldas the whole time, and this chick has just been napping for a long time. The only way to wake her up and prevent Ganon from returning to Hyrule is to place 6 crystals in 6 shrines across the world, and gain the last piece of the Triforce to wake up Zelda. While this is going on, Ganon's minions are trying to kill you because they believe spreading Link's blood on Ganon's ashes will revive him? What? I don't understand why there's 2 Zeldas and why all of a sudden the first one isn't around at all. The Link's blood ritual thing also makes no sense. Like, what would the whole crystal system have to do if it's just as simple as stealing some blood from a 16-year-old? Also, the bosses in this game suck. Besides Dark Link, all the bosses are boring and have no variety, but even then, Dark Link just looks cool, and players quickly found this easy exploit of just killing him by kneeling in a corner and spamming attack. Yeah, ironically, the easiest thing about this game, this game that everyone's saying is so unfairly difficult, the easiest thing is the bosses hysterically. My last main point of contention against Zelda is how boring and redundant the dungeons are. Don't get me wrong, the dungeons in Zelda 1 all look the exact same except for a color swap. But the enemy variety and the puzzles with the blocks and all that stuff were 10 times more fun than the nothingness that is Zelda 2's dungeons. Some of them you have to have this stupid invisible wall thing that just... Come on, dude. I will give them some credit. Towards the end of the dungeons, they start adding platforming to the gameplay, but they had these stupid floating head things that knock you off that was in a ton of other of NES games, like Mario, like Mega Man, like Castlevania. God, I hated playing this game. Look, like I said, if you love The Legend of Zelda 2, more power to you. I'm so glad you did. But to answer the original question, is this game worth playing in 2025? The answer is no. If you're worried about like missing the overall story of Zelda, or you're trying to play them in order to make a more streamlined story process, you can truly skip Zelda 2. If you're worried about missing out on the overall story of Zelda, because, I don't know, you want to marathon and play all these games, I do have some good news for you. This one is an easy skip. This takes place in the Hero is Defeated timeline. You know, the timeline where after Ocarina of Time, they made a fictional timeline in case Link was actually killed, and then they connected all the games, and oh my lord, why is this so convoluted and stupid? Basically, to sum it up, Zelda 2 is at the end, and it's just Link wakes up Zelda, and he lives happily ever after. You can very easily miss this story. I actually do think, as much as I think the overall timeline of Zelda is kind of dumb, I do think like it does flow decently if you keep an open mind and don't nitpick every little detail. But Zelda 2 and maybe like Spirit Tracks are just such skips when it comes to Zelda games in terms of story. The Legend of Zelda 2 Adventure of Link is such a disappointment compared to its predecessor. The world is vastly more boring, exploration has been nerfed and dumbed down, the difficulty is so unfair, and overall, it's just not that fun to play. And I'm a big gameplay is the most important thing to video games, and it's just miserable to play. So overall, is this game worth playing? Like I said, the answer is no. But hey, at least Link gets a kiss at the very end, which is something he doesn't get that much in these games. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode on Zelda 2. I want to do more positive reviews, but I feel so passionately about my disdain for Zelda 2. And like I said, if you love this game, tell me why you loved it, and some of my criticism that you think are unfair, too harsh, or maybe I missed something so cool about this game. I'm all about having those casual conversations. I don't, want to come off as this I'm right, you're wrong, shut up attitude. But the talking about other future ideas, I do know my next game I'm going to cover is Marvel Spider-Man, and that will be a positive one, because I truly do love that game when it came out in 2018. And as far as the angle I'm going to approach it with, that's still up for debate. But if you're a fan of Spider-Man like I am, tune in for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next gaming adventure.